I have Dr. Julius Agbor from Africa Research Fellow at Brookings Institute. He's going to be talking to us today about the CFA in Francophone Africa. So Dr. Agbor is going to give a short presentation, and then we're going to give him some questions. And following Dr. Agbor, we'll have Mr. Rene Tamegi from Itabong Enterprises Incorporated.
Usually, I like to start with a little joke. There is this African country, poor African country government. They are facing an economic crisis. And the president conveyed his cabinet of ministers to a meeting, a crisis meeting. How do we get out of this situation? What's the way out? And one of the ministers, who probably thought he was smarter than everybody else, put their hands up and said, I have an idea. So what's your idea? He said, the way to come out of this crisis is to launch war against the United States. Now, everybody was quiet, trying to do the math. How do you come out of a crisis by launching war against the United States of America? Well, the president asked him, can you explain to us how that would help us come out of the crisis? And he said, well, if we are a poor country, if we fight against the United States, we're certainly going to lose. And if we lost, then the U.S. would give us reparations. It will finance us like it did to Japan and Germany, and will become a superpower. And everybody, wow, that's a great idea. But wait a minute, the president, what if we win? And that was the puzzle. What if we win? So regarding the Franc zone, it's usually a question about, not really about whether they fail. It's more the question on the other side, what if this zone succeeds? That is really the crucial challenge for CFA countries. It's not that they fail. If they fail, the IMF is there, will bail them out. But the question is, what if they succeed? What are weights? So that's what I want to do in the next 10 minutes while I stand here, to look at some of the stereotypes, some of the things that we have thought about for so long that they have become truths in a sense. But I want us to challenge ourselves, because this conference is about challenging ourselves, challenging what we think, revising our ideas, and setting forth on a new ground. So this discussion is about examining some of the stylized facts we know about the CFA zone. And one of those is that CFA countries trade mainly with francs. How many of you also believe that? That CFA countries trade mostly with francs. And there's another long stereotype that the fixed exchange regime is the main cause of the underdevelopment of CFA countries. I'm not saying that this is false. I'm just saying, I'm just bringing out some of those stylized facts, and we look at the data and see whether that is true, because we are here to challenge ourselves. Another stereotype is that countries that left the franc zone are relatively better off than those that have stick onto it. And lastly, just fourth stereotype, I'm sure there are many. The last one is that the best option for CFA countries is for them to leave the franc zone. In fact, I had a friend of mine, Babi Kasana or something. He runs an NGO in Cameroon, and he has been advocating. He wrote this beautiful letter to all the African heads of states, and warning them that, francs must stay clear of Africa, and all this. So many things. Beautiful things, well argued. So that's from where this fourth stereotype is coming from. So let's look carefully at them. I'm not going to have the time to go through all the slides here. I would quickly just go to the substance of my argument. I'm sure most of you know all of these things, that actually even the denomination CFA has been contradictory. It means a different thing in WAMO zone, and it means a different thing in the CMAC zone, but we'll not worry ourselves about that for now. So typically the CIMAC has 6 countries. Cameroon is the leader in that group. And this group of countries have a total population of about 36 million. That's roughly the population of Poland, with a GDP of about $17 billion. Whereas the WAMU countries are a little bit more populous, about 99 million people. I think that's about the population of Iraq, if I'm not mistaken. So the striking difference between the two countries is that CIMAC countries export a lot of oil. And in the WAMU zone, they are more or less agricultural-based economies. So for the brief history, you know that there were some countries in the Franc zone that left. At least some of you know about Guinea-Conakry that quit the French community in 1957. But also the Maghrebian countries of Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia were previously there, including Lebanon. They all left the Franc zone. But there were others also who joined voluntarily, who were not former British colonies, like Guinea-Bissau and Equatorial Guinea. Now, confronting the first stereotype that CIMAC countries or CFA countries trade mainly with France. This is the latest data. And you can see, I'm not sure I have a pointer to show you here. Okay, it works. At least in volume terms, you see that exports to the US by far dominate, exceed exports to France and to the Eurozone. Anyway, you have already figured it out. You say, oh, but these guys are exporting oil. Doesn't matter because, well, maybe the US buys more oil. So this one may not look a very compelling argument. But the substance is still there, that France is not the one. They are not selling predominantly to France and to the Eurozone. Now, look at the WAMU zone. In the WAMU, that's the West African Economic and Monetary Union, which are mainly agriculture-based economies. You can see that the exports to France has been dwindling. Same the exports to the Eurozone in general has stabilized over time, whereas to the US it has been rapidly increasing, and China. Now, to confront the second stereotype, what I try to do is do some kind of comparative comparison. That is, you don't compare apples with grapes. The CIMAC zone is different from the WAMU zone, so we can't lump them all together and compare against other countries. We must find a set of countries that look like CIMAC countries and a set of countries that look like the WAMU countries, that's the counterfactual, and see whether what we are observing in terms of performance is because of the Franc zone or is because of something else. So the group of countries that are similar to the CIMAC countries, oil exporting countries, are the Nigeria, DRC, Angola, and all the rest. These are mainly resource-based countries which have also experienced the resource scarce problem like the CIMAC countries. Then another bunch of countries which are in the majority are mainly agriculture-based economies. This can be compared to WAMU. So I call this WAMU comparable, CIMAC comparable, and CFA comparable. That's the group of countries that left the Franc zone, to see also compare their performance relative to those that have stayed. So quickly, let's go through the data. In terms of inflation performance, you can see that inflation in the Franc zone countries has been very, very low, which is one of the benefits of having that fixed exchange regime. And compared to the CIMAC comparable, the Nigeria's, Angola, you see that they do worse. Their inflation rate is very, very high compared to the WAMU countries, to the CIMAC countries, to the CFA countries, I beg your pardon. What's also very interesting, forgive me, I have a lot of things here that I did not explain to you because I'm just using the same PowerPoint I presented to a different group, and I didn't have enough time to take out what is not necessary. But forget about what you don't understand. I'm sure you know what you understand. So, but what's so interesting is that the CFA comparable group of countries, even when they left the Franc zone, they continued to have very low inflation. So they became addicted to the virus against inflation. You know, even after they left, they continued to do well. Now, in terms of income level, how poor or rich countries are, GDP per capita levels, you find that the CMAC countries have very high per capita income compared to the CMAC comparable. Well, you could quickly say Equatorial Guinea there and, too much oil and all the stuff. So I understand and I will agree with you. Now, WAMO countries compared to WAMO comparable, there's basically no difference. Well, the bottom line in all this is simply that there's a lot, oil is driving the performance or the income level in the CMAC countries. Now, in terms of growth of income, how income has been growing over time, we also see the oil story in the CMAC countries. You see that incomes have grown much faster in the CMAC zone than in the CMAC comparable, than in WAMO, than in countries that left the CFA franc zone. It becomes more interesting now. From the previous slide, you would have thought that since these countries here have a lot of money, they sell a lot of oil, and to the best of our knowledge, there is a state that manages this oil. You would have expected that the state would be paying its arrears and debts to the public, and so the public would put their money in terms in the commercial banks. The commercial banks will have a lot of money to give out lending to people and business activity, economic growth. But wait a minute. Look at this. Domestic credit to the private sector as percentage of GDP. CMAC countries, for all that money, where is it going to? Okay, that's right. You guessed it correctly. So, but it's quite interesting in that the CMAC comparable countries, the Nigerias, where are they also keeping their money? It's not in the banking system, or, well, this is not what it suggests. It simply says that the banking system is not giving out enough credit to the private sector. So there might be a problem here. It may not just really be a problem of the CFA zone. It might also be a problem that is contagious in the countries that are not in the CFA. But look at the countries that left the CFA zone, the volume of credit. Because you live in the United States, you understand, if they suppress credit cards, how many of you are going to live? It's virtually our life wire. Now, but in these countries, they can't even borrow. They can't even borrow from the banks and financial institutions. Now, quickly, the rest of the slides will go very fast. In terms of life expectancy, you can see that in CMAC, it is relatively higher than in CMAC comparable, but in WAMO, it is lower than WAMO comparable countries. But countries that left the franc zone have higher life expectancy. Mortality rates are better in CMAC than in CMAC comparable, but of course, not as compared to countries that left the franc zone. In terms of the percentage of population with access to clean water, there's not much a difference to tell. In terms of literacy rates, CMAC zone has higher literacy rates than CMAC comparable countries. WAMO does worse than WAMO comparable, but in terms of with countries that left the franc zone, there's not much difference. Intensity of deprivation, that is to measure poverty, how much hunger harms people. You find in the CMAC zone, there's less, the intensity is lesser than in CMAC comparable. It's worse in WAMO countries than in WAMO comparable. Not much difference to tell with the countries that left. How are these countries spending on education? You have been emphasizing how education is important. CMAC countries do better than countries that CMAC comparable countries. WAMO do worse than WAMO comparable, but all of them don't do as much as countries that left the franc zone. In terms of percentage of paved roads in the country, there's no road going to where I come from in Manfi. In CMAC countries, it's no surprise in any way that the percentage of paved road is lower than in CMAC comparable. But all of that saying, countries that are in the franc zone don't have as much roads as countries that left the franc zone. In terms of internet subscribers, nobody. They can't send me any emails. It's not happening. In terms of cost of doing business, see the cost of doing business. Some of you are entrepreneurs. You want to invest in Africa, back in Cameroon. It's very costly to do business in Cameroon, but this is not to discourage you. You can try. Thomas will give you some clues how to get around the system. But the cost of business currently is very high in CIMAC countries compared to CIMAC comparable, and it's also high in WAMO compared to WAMO comparable. And all of this story, franc zone is very costly to do business than countries that left the franc zone. So what are we drawing from all of this story? It appears that countries that left the franc zone have performed relatively better on most development indicators than the countries that have remained. However, amongst the countries that have remained, the resource-rich countries of CIMAC have outperformed the agriculture-based economies of WAMO, but not in certain indicators, for example, in infrastructure and business environment. You saw that even though the CIMAC countries, the franc zone countries are doing poorly, at least WAMO does relatively better than CIMAC. Finally, in comparison with CIMAC comparable, the CIMAC states do better than the Nigerias, the Angolas, and Mozambique, suggesting that maybe the franc zone, the CFA regime might have been beneficial to CIMAC states. This is a maybe. We need to do some testing. We can't conclude from here. We need to do some econometrics to prove it, whether it's true. Therefore, the monetary arrangement with France appears to have benefited the mineral-rich countries. It appears. You take note of my words. We need to still prove that. Going forward, it doesn't appear that exiting the franc zone is the first best option for CFA countries, at least not for CIMAC countries. Rather, it does appear to me, and you have the right to disagree, it does appear that the main problems facing the CFA countries are by and large governance-related problems. You see the poor infrastructure, poor business doing environment, and all of that. So this is what I wanted to tease you with, and if we have some time, we could continue with questions. And I hope to learn from you. Thank you.